Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. Together, we explore topics of interest to in-house lawyers. Let's begin. Here's your host, Olga Mack.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. I am really excited about today's conversations. I am going to talk to someone who is not just an amazing lawyer and professional, she's also a dear friend. She is someone who inspired me to show up for businesses I support fully, unapologetically, enthusiastically, and authentically. She has done all kinds of things for people she supported. She dressed in costume, for Christ's sake. She's been doing amazing things. Every time she tells me about her adventures, I tell her, you did that? I rarely tell that to anyone. It is hard to surprise me. I've done all of it to support my businesses, but she's someone who surprises me all the time in amount of creativity, enthusiasm, and dedication she has for her businesses. And without further ado, Alexandra, welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. We're finally having this conversation after I had hundreds and hundreds of conversations with everybody else who I don't know nearly as well as I know you. So it's about time. I think I've earned the right and the privilege to talk to you, to the one and only Alexandra. For people who don't know you, who haven't had an opportunity to cross paths with you, to know about your work, to know about your enthusiasm, please introduce yourself.
First of all, thank you so much, Olga. And it's really great to meet all of you. I hope we get a chance to connect on LinkedIn. I am a legal professional who is at their bones practical. And the thought that I'm always having is, how do we make sure that we're doing the work that really drives the business forward? And I think this is where I remember very clearly having this conversation with you, Olga. And this was sort of the moment when I knew that you were going to be a CEO and I probably was going to stay in-house legal, because we had this conversation where I was talking about how I like to do in-house trainings. And in-house trainings, I was like, I will use the world to make it interesting to people, because at the end of the day, I don't want to be answering the same questions over and over and over again. I remember you saying to me in that moment, you were like, well, I want people to be focused on me in the training. And that's when I knew that we were going to have these two different paths. And so it is completely not surprising to me that you are a CEO and I am now still doing my in-house thing.
I remember that conversation, and what came out of that conversation is an, I think, amazing article about you for the Association of Corporate Counsel. And you were the first person who told me that you dress up as various characters or humans to make sure that the trainings actually register. And I thought, wow, that's a very interesting thing to do. I probably would not do that. I do like to show up as myself. That's very important to me. And I'd like to be memorable as that person. But you are effective at what you're doing because you take a different approach. And I remember writing that article and thinking, wow, there is a different path, not for me, but certainly effective. But what are you doing today before we talk about the things you've done and approaches you've taken?
Yeah, I'm Associate General Counsel at Trust and Will. Trust and Will is an online platform where anyone can come and make either a trust or a will for themselves. It's really about the democratization of estate planning for people. And at the company, I currently support all of our vendor agreements, our people team, a lot of our enterprise partnerships. I work on product, marketing, advertising, and all the other things that sort of, as we in-house lawyers know, the things that don't like naturally have a place, I end up being the starting place for them.
Oh, you are the home for all the misfits in your company. Oh, I just love that. I just love that. Yesterday, I was talking to another in-house lawyer, and she said, I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing this. And I was like, and there's a very long list of ands. And I love this. Seems to be a theme of many in-house lawyers that I talk to. And then certainly, exactly what was my experience as an in-house leader in my previous lives. And I know you, Alexandra, you have had many previous lives. You've been a serial general counsel, a serial in-house lawyer, a serial leader. You've been at some iconic, amazing companies. What were you doing before you got to this iconic company, Trust and Will? That's a well-known company. I know a lot of folks use it. It is an innovator in its space. And I'm not surprised you're in a company like that. But where else have you been and what else have you done?
I think I was really lucky to come up in legal during a time when you really had opportunities to cut your teeth on work that was easy to learn and grok and to get experiences in. I started off actually as a patent litigator. I had been a paralegal at my firm, and when I came out of law school in 2004, I mean, the market was terrible, and I was very lucky that my firm had me back as an associate. I spent those first couple of years being in trials really back to back. I did my first ITC trial. And for those of you that don't know, like when you think about lawsuits, they normally take years, right, to ever go to trial. And ITC at the time, it was like you went from like complaint to judgment in the space of like a year or less. And I think having the opportunity to have all of that experience compressed, I really got to see the full cycle of litigation. And the thought that I always had was like, okay, like we're sort of brought in to clean up when something's gone wrong. I'm really interested in the business decisions that came before this. And when that started happening, another senior associate, Lisa Widup, was kind enough to say like, hey, listen, if you're interested in doing something more than litigation, we've got a lot of cease and desist letters that need to happen. And I thought to myself, well, maybe this is an opportunity to see like what's happening on the more counseling transactional side. And that experience is what led me to my first in-house gig, which was at General Mills. And I got to tell you, Olga, I never thought that when a recruiter for General Mills reached out that I was going to get the job. The whole time I thought to myself, oh, they just probably reached out because they saw I have trademark experience and I'd been doing work for some bigger clients at that point. And it never occurred to me that I actually was going to shift my whole life to Minneapolis. But I thought to myself, what's the worst thing that happens? Like, I don't like it. I can always move back to California. And that experience at General Mills was really the first time that I had to really sit with the business, with the decisions that I was helping guide them to make. And that experience, I think, really shifted how I looked at legal. And after a couple of years at General Mills, I got recruited to come back to California to a fast-growing gaming startup called Kabam. Kabam at the time was, mostly a web-based games. And then about halfway through my tenure there, all of a sudden the world shifted to mobile. And I just wanted to say that we're all on the precipice of an incredible change in legal right now. And it really makes me think about when the world shifted from web-based games to mobile and how quickly everyone had to get up to speed on like, what is this new world, et cetera. And really from that time, I've been lucky enough to be at a number of great startups. And really that experience of starting off in the gaming industry, which shifts so quickly, really has set me up to be able to figure out when to pivot and not.
I love that. I now remember our first conversation. I think that ITC 1 year to trial and cleanup is a trauma bonding we had years ago. Because I had exactly similar experience in my first couple of years. I was on Sonsini doing depositions all over the world, going through fast-moving trials. You really get to see kind of what cleanup looks like, and then asking a question, really, so how did we get here? And how do we not get here again? Your story very much feels like, oh my, now I remember the trauma bonding. That's exactly why we became friends. And I love that story of your career that tells a story of really evolution of technology and flexibility of shifting and following the opportunities that are in front of you, including the one that is in front of us today. And I definitely want to talk more about it. But let's focus on when you started your career. What was that, grunt work that actually taught you the most about being a lawyer?
So I think for me, like it would be very easy to say that, document review was sort of where I got to learn judgment in an easy place. But I think for me, it was when I started transitioning into more of a trademark role and sending out cease and desist letters. I think.
I mean, it sounds like document review was a place where you learned what you don't want to be, which is honestly a super useful input data point. Because that was for me too, to be clear.
I think so, but I think at the same time, like looking back on it now, I think I'm still very grateful for that, because the opportunity to learn judgment on something where, if you get it wrong, it probably isn't catastrophic. I'm really grateful for that. If you think about the pace of AI acceleration, a lot of sort of that quote unquote easier work is now being able to be done by AI, right? And so even though, to your point, I'm grateful to not have to do it anymore, I still feel like it was a great place to start. And now it's really making me think, in particular, as I grow and scale legal teams, how do we figure out what is that entry level work that people can really use to start to figure out how do you develop your legal professional gut?
Yeah. So let's maybe dig a little deeper. There's a common assumption that routine legal work is just busy work, whether you call that doc review or sometimes even contract NDAs, or even contract negotiation. At some point, when at some point I negotiated many contracts, and folks would tell me, get with me on a call, and I would basically tell them, what are you going to tell me that I don't already know? I mean, I already
have. But don't you feel like sometimes there's just something to getting on a call with someone, even if you know what your position is, even if you know that you're not going to shift from it, there's something to that emotional arc between you and the legal professional on the other side about just hearing them out, right? Like, even if you don't make a move, and I know it's annoying.
The way I feel about those people who need to be heard is that they do not do the emotional work on self to collapse distance between words and action.
I hear you, but you still want to get to do it, right?
And sometimes they need it. And sometimes they need it. But you do push back, and this is very common. The process of getting to a yes actually does involve hearing the other human who needs to do this work real time with you, potentially as playing the role of a therapist or a sounding board.
Yeah, I mean, even if their position is bat, insert word here, crazy, like they still want to be heard, right? And so I always think about it like, what's the fastest path to yes? And your legal gut will tell you, all right, I guess we're going to have to get on a call. And sometimes that call can be really important strategically, because you got to know when to let the answer hang. And that is one thing that AI is never going to be able to do, right? Sometimes if you just let the answer hang, everyone else on the call will hear it for the crazy that it is, or the commercially unreasonable that it is. And I think that's one of those things that I think a lot about, is the power of a purposeful pause.
Or silence. So tell me more about that, and how has it been helpful in your career? And it sounds like you see that's the gap, for example, that AI may not be able to fill.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, what we all know, what the studies and the research have shown us is that, AI can be sycophantic, right? AI wants to get to yes. And I think as legal professionals, we ultimately want to get to yes, but we also know that there might be a little bit of a winding, twisting path to get there. And that purposeful pause is one of the things in our tool set that can allow us to make that turn in the contract negotiations.
Yeah, there are default settings in most LLMs today that wants to get to yes. You can also alter them. I altered in mine because I don't value agreement nearly as much as I value learning. So all my LLMs are actually programmed to both sides at a minimum, and probably devil's advocate and skew on questioning my assumptions. I find those conversations much more stimulating and useful. But I think majority of people are not aware of the settings, never tinker with them, and frankly value the agreement and the good feeling they get out of it much more. And so you get a lot of agreements in the bubble you create.
I think that's right. And it's interesting because I think almost a year and a half ago now, a friend of mine, Amy Guzman, and I gave a presentation at a technology conference that was happening in San Diego. And when we were sitting there talking about AI to a room full of M&A lawyers, you could just feel the waves of skepticism coming off of everyone. And it's so interesting to see where the conversation has shifted to now, right? Like now you're seeing a lot of in-house lawyers that are like, hey, listen, law firm, I know that you're going to be using AI to do my work. You need to pass on those savings to me. Like, hey, like, we're now being very strategic with the work that we're sending out because we can push through so much more capacity internal than we used to be able to. And I think that whole evolution has been really interesting as well. I don't know if you're seeing that in your world as well.
Yeah. Are you seeing savings from AI being here?
Yeah, I mean, I see it in the bills, but I think it's like there's savings, but there's also the legal team's attention savings that I'm seeing as well, right? Like when we can use our judgment to layer into AI to get something done faster, it saves more time for more of the internal conversations that we would love to have, but rarely have the time for. Example, like entry-level salesperson has never worked seriously with the legal team before. If you can use AI to get you a first pass of a vendor agreement that then gives you a little bit of time back, you can then have that conversation with the sales people. And what do they say? A stitch in time saves 9. Like that's exactly what I think of when I get to have the opportunity to have those conversations with them. Because a lot of times, think about it, if this is their first sales role, you can bet your bottom dollar that during onboarding, no one in sales leadership probably had a conversation with them about like, hey, this is what it's like to work with the legal team. This is what an NDA is. This is what a one-way NDA is versus a mutual versus a first pass. And this is what you can expect working with the legal team. And I think that's the thing that I feel like we're sort of glossing over it in terms of like, hey, like it'll save time, but I don't know how much people are talking about what to do with that time, because a lot of us are just going right to the next agreement, right to the next fire, right to the next emergency. And like, what would happen if we were more purposeful with what we were using that time savings on?
Yeah, I mean, I see that. What I also see is that in-house teams with various tools and guardrails can handle more and more of first drafts. And historically, even things that would right away go to a law firm could and probably should start in-house, because you have folks in-house who deeply care, deeply understand their business, understand facts, understand their systems. So they are in a position to do, for example, even early litigation drafts. They may or may not be the filers. They may or may not be the folks who show up and argue, but they may be the first draft, increasingly so, because those early drafts disclose the systems, the facts, the risk profile, and positioning. And they are in a very good position to write a first draft that shapes the narrative, for example. And you have increasingly number of tools that allow to do that. So I think it is both a combination. Where do you spend your free time? But also, where should you be more involved in things that we almost automatically outsourced in the past, like M&A and litigation for most, unless you're a very big department and this is your core business. For example, litigation is a core business for insurance, and some businesses have M&A as an essential strategy. Something like Oracle, for example, where they have their internal M&A. But for most other businesses, even big ones, they're almost automatically historically outsourced. I think what's outsourced is very much increasingly being questioned, even for those things that, almost never used to be handled in-house, and time for more human connection.
For more human connection. It's a really good point. But I was thinking about it as you were talking about like, oh, like maybe we have more time to do more litigation in-house. And like my immediate thought was, may that love never find me. Like, I think,
oh, look at your enthusiasm for litigation.
I think it's because like once you've been on the cleanup and aisle 9 part of litigation, there's a part of you that's like, how much value am I really bringing to the business? Because as you know, like if you decide to take on a piece of litigation in-house and you are a small team, it can wipe out capacity really quickly in a way that you don't anticipate. But I think, you know, to your point, if you were on a larger legal team where you can do that, then it could take a first pass through a complaint. You know, having recently worked on a dispute matter, I used it to create sort of the first draft of our position on it. And that was really helpful. But I think, you know, I still think about, was that the right use of my time, right? Would I have been better off using that time to work on an enterprise agreement on behalf of the company? But it's a great point.
Yeah, for sure. So let's maybe talk about AI, because we are getting to that conversation that we set out to get. You know, if AI can draft a first pass of a contract, not litigation, doesn't sound like you have a lot of love for that. And I agree with you. Honestly, the most catastrophic thing that could happen to most businesses is litigation, because it won't just wipe out your time. It actually could wipe out the company. So that is not a small threat, because it is costly and costs a lot of resources other than money, including attention to develop new lines of business. So, you know, or things like summarize case law in seconds. What exactly are junior lawyers missing out on by not, you know, kind of doing it themselves?
I think what you're missing out on is the opportunity to develop your gut. And that's, I'm not saying that you shouldn't use AI, period. I love AI. I think it's been a game changer for a lot of us. But I think Nada from Contract Nerds really put it together in a way that really resonates with me, which is her Oreo cookie method, right? Which is human, AI, human. And I think when you take a first pass yourself and you start identifying the issues and how you would think about them, and then you use AI to supplement that, I think if people can stomach doing that for a while, then you can get to a point where you've almost trained yourself up on what the issues are that should be identified, so that when you go AI first, you then can figure out what did it miss. And I think when you go straight AI first, you're not giving yourself the opportunity to issue spot at the very least to make sure that you're not missing anything.
Yeah, I've seen that visual she put out. She definitely has some great content and frameworks, and especially when you are using general LLM as opposed to guardrail specific fit for purpose, which hopefully we'll see more of. I think you need to start with this human AI layer, human again. If you have a kind of more built-in structure in that, maybe you can afford to be a little bit more intellectually lazy either in the beginning or the end.
Not be intellectually lazy, Olga. Goodness.
Well, I mean, the world is trending toward bigger, faster, sooner, cheaper. So whether you call that savings, efficiency, or intellectual laziness, let's call it what it is. So if there are enough guardrails and the stream of the universe will automatically bring you to the right place, that sure, we can relax. And if you trust that system and it hasn't failed in the past, and you have tested it many times that it's basically almost certainty, you can allow the stream of the universe to bring you to good places. But unless you have that confidence, I think that Oreo cookie method, especially in something so generic like LLMs available out of the box, you absolutely need, you can't afford to be intellectually lazy, because a lot of legal know-how is not just laws, it's actually experiences, most of which like sort of lives in your head or your private vaults, and you don't have LLM being trained on it. So it's not that LLM means bad things. It is that it only as good as its training is, and it's not trained on private thoughts the last time I checked.
No, it's a really good point. I think the other layer to it as well is that an LLM is never going to know what market is. And being in that pocket of market is really important. And I get it. Like there might be moments of conflict between you and the other side on what market is, but at least both of you have a developed point of view of what that is. And, you know, we might say like breach of confidentiality should always be uncapped. Other companies might say, for example, like you need a super cap on privacy, right? But all of that, like that is the place where judgment lives. That from my perspective, AI, even legal specific AI, is not going to be able to take over, because that concept of market is so key to how we do our jobs as legal professionals.
Yeah, I actually think you hit on something really important. And I think there is a difference between judgment and benchmarking.
Mm-hmm.
Judgment is something that you develop through experiences when you problem solve, as opposed to seek answers. There's a difference between knowing what GDPR says and whether or not you should be releasing a feature to minors. That's a judgment call. But what you identified is actually another thing, which is benchmarking, which involves collection of representative data sample, making sure that it's clean, properly segmented, actually answers the questions, and then gives you correct benchmark in a narrow question or a broad question that you're asking. And that is actually not a small I mean, I don't know if it was supposed to be a soft comment meant for me to talk about Term Scout, but that's all we do. My entire business is based on developing that. And that is not a small business. That is actually a massive, massive business. That is part of infrastructure. And it requires a lot of intentionality. And frankly, it's very geeky. It's on the intersection of yes, technology, yes, law, and actually data science, a lot of data, and properly pulling it out and surfacing at the right time. And so that benchmarking piece is actually very critical. And you can and should use AI on the back end to make sure that that happens accurately and routinely. And that's when I said you can be a little bit more intellectually lazy if you actually have measures to go with it, such as benchmark. So for example, and we see this when we go to a hospital, the first thing that happens when you go to a hospital, a human get weight, measured, pulse, all kinds of things. And those are just sort of general benchmarks against what's normal to a human and whether or not you're in a position to perform other things. And that's what needs to be happening at legal work. That's why that's actually a shortcut for a doctor to zero in why you're there, as opposed to perform a CPR, which would be a different procedure if you, for example, had pulse problems. And so I think benchmarking is actually very important, very separate from judgment, and a massive aid to judgment and getting to answers faster. But sorry, I interrupted you. You open a can of worms to talk about benchmarks. I will stop and focus on you because I'm here to interview you, and you seem like you have a lot to say.
No, you made me think about the concept of benchmarks, though. And, coming back to like our original umbrella topic, which is, raising lawyers when AI does the thinking. The other layer that I was thinking about, when we started figuring out what is this conversation is going to be around, is really encouraging earlier career professionals to form relationships with people outside of the company, right? Whether that is you using your own network to get them connected with people. But I think one of the things that is really helpful is figuring out informal mentors for the people who are on our team. And I think, if ideally you can connect them with people who are just a couple of clicks ahead of them career-wise, as well as their peers, I think that can be really important as well. Like we all need our own personal board of directors that we can call and say, in a way that doesn't disclose attorney-client privilege matters, but saying like, hey, I would love your thoughts on limitation of liability, indemnity for a marketing-based SaaS agreement. Do you think XYZ is market, or conversely, I'm struggling with a behavior I'm seeing from business person X. What have you seen work before? And again, that's another one of those places where AI isn't going to help that earlier career professional on figuring something like that out. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a form of benchmarking, just maybe less rigorous and less scientific and kind of right. I mean, we do this as lawyers. That's how we bond. We compare. Let's see what happened to me, what happened to you. This is not a competition. This is more like calibration. This is obviously may or may not be a representative sample. If you really want to be doing benchmarking, you have to start thinking about the population representative samples, how clean the data is. Like you have to bring the data rigor into it. However, we do that sampling and hoping for representative sampling pretty much all our actions as lawyers, whether you're in-house at a law firm, when you talk to your trusted friend, in another company or in another law firm, I would say that's essentially a hack for benchmarking without the intellectual rigor that data science requires. And honestly, it's like a pretty good proxy when you're lacking in tools, and that is not a bad thing. That's a very, very good thing. And I would be curious, if you talk, for example, to somebody who's junior and they're in the beginning of their career, how do you spot that gap in judgment? What does it look like when someone, skipped the reps?
It's a great question. I mean, I think there is this tendency to focus on business came asking question X. I am now approaching you, senior attorney, to have a conversation about getting back to the business on question X. And a lot of times in that conversation, I like to, in particular, if I feel like there's a part of the analysis that's missing, I like to probe, okay, person wants to solve question X. I like to use open-ended questions to be like, what else does that bring up for you? What are the other business and legal issues that you think come up in question X? And if they're like, oh, nothing else, I think we just need to solve question X, that's a signal to me that they're not thinking holistically about the thing. Because I think a lot of times what people forget is like, yes, we are the legal function, but we are also the organizational glue, right? Because so many of the pipes pass through legal, we end up having a different point of view in the business that earlier career professional may not understand that they're in a position to see.
Yeah. So let me maybe ask you a question that's more direct than the one before. Is there a risk that law firms and legal departments start expecting senior level judgment from people who never actually had junior level, suffering, training, learning by osmosis, however positive or negative spin you want to put on what has been happening?
Yeah, I think that's very much a risk. And I think it's on all of us, sort of as the more senior legal professionals in the room, to validate understanding and to make it a safe space for people to ask questions, right? And I know that sometimes that sounds really easy and simplistic, but making people feel like asking questions is encouraged is part of the muscle memory here, right? There's always going to be way too much to do, not enough resources to do it, even with AI, and giving ourselves the opportunities to do that. I said to our legal operations manager, I said, would you like me to walk you through like how I think about NDAs, vendor agreements, et cetera? And I'm super happy for this to be designed by you as much as you would like, et cetera, et cetera. And, I think because it was a little bit open-ended, we ended up designing curriculum that was not only relevant to her role, but also relevant to the other junior attorney on the team. And so we've been marching through this almost like in-house counsel brain dump 101, everything from marketing and advertising compliance to common pressure points in vendor agreements, common pressure points in enterprise agreements. And that's been really interesting to sort of see what two sort of in different parts of the business, legal professionals are really wrestling with as far as their learning goes.
I would be curious to know, what is your take on AI as training wheels, which is something you hear in discourse today, argument that junior lawyers can use AI output as learning tool rather than shortcut.
That, I think, presupposes that the junior attorney knows the questions to ask to get the output out. And that's the thing that, when you were asking me the questions, I was thinking to myself, well, to our earlier point, let's say that an earlier stage career person is looking at an NDA, right? And they're asking the AI, teach me how to review this NDA. Well, the AI is going to answer that question based off of the NDA that's in front of them. It isn't necessarily going to teach them like, okay, is there another piece of context that you haven't given to me that's missing? Let's say that it's an NDA with a vendor, but there is somewhere in the universe this thought that we might want to acquire that vendor. That's a very different level of NDA review, right? So I still think that even if it's AI, it still needs to be AI plus legal professional help guiding it, because the AI is never going to have as much context as the human has. That's my hill, and I'm going to die on it.
Well, in that case, I'll stop talking, because I definitely don't want you to die, Alexandra. But I love it. This is great. Time has flew by. We are coming to the end of the conversation. I could talk to you for a long time. I probably could talk to you all day. I do have a few questions. Let's talk about something easy. Let's talk about redesigning law schools. The very easy subject that we will explore as part of our goodbye. If you could redesign how law schools or first-year associate programs prepare lawyers for an AI-assisted practice, what would you change?
I think I would change that we all go through contracts, right? And we go through contracts to help us start to think about the building blocks from a legal perspective about contracts. The thing that we don't learn is how to work on contracts in a business context, and how to make sure that you understand the right pieces of the business to even review the contract in the first place. And so if I were going to go back into law school and magically be in a position where I could require a training, that would be it. It would be everyone has to go through some sort of form of like real life contract boot camp, right? And in my most ideal dreamy scenario, it's like everyone goes through that boot camp, and then there's a clinic to work with entrepreneurs on their agreements. That's a benefit to both sides, because I think no matter where you sit in the ecosystem, learning how to review a contract is really helpful.
Is that how you learn contracting?
I learned contracting by being a paralegal who during the e-discovery days had to negotiate those vendor agreements, right? And I was like, I don't even understand what's happening here. And because I had to do so many reps of them, that's how I learned.
Interesting. I have this question because that's not a representative way of how people usually learn to contract. Even today, I mean, forget about AI. That is not how I learned to negotiate contract. And your story is very unique. And there are more opportunities to learn it more systematically. And there are some entrepreneurship clinics, such as in Santa Clara, for example, or courses by David or Laura, or things that NATA provides. But I don't believe those were there when I started to learn contracting, and I learned it in a very different way. And I ask this question because the answer is usually not systematic for folks of my vintage. And I mean, it's interesting that we do hope and that folks who follow actually take a different path. And thank you for sharing how you learn contracting. What is your advice to a junior lawyer who wants to make junior, or actually both junior and senior lawyer, because honestly, we all have to transition to this new world. AI is here and it's here to stay. I'm not sure it's going anywhere. Actually, I don't think it's going anywhere. So what do you think, junior or senior person, whether it's the same or different, if they are, actually want to be building judgment, because I do not want to presuppose that senior folks have more judgment. I've met many senior folks who have lacking in that department. And
shots fired, Olga. Shots fired.
I'm not singling anyone out. I think before AI, we could pass answers of what the statute says or what the law says to come across as judgment, and answers are not judgment. I think what AI exposes is that answers are not judgment, and many of us know many more answers that are willing to give a good judgment. So it is true that juniors need to learn judgment. It is also true that some seniors too. Regardless, how do you get some?
I think you have to decide that it's an investment that you're going to make in yourself. What do I mean by that? It could be very easy the next time that a contract or a piece of work comes across your desk for you to just jump right into the AI piece of it. And what I've started doing periodically, just to make sure that my own judgment skills don't get rusty, is, and everyone's going to hate this, I know it, I know everyone's going to hate this, I will print it out. I will print out whatever it is that I need to go through. I will print it out, and I will sit there with a ruler, a physical ruler, and I will go through it line by line. Why do I do that? Because I know that I've been doing this for so long that if I don't make myself go line by line, I will skip over it, I will gloss over it, and then I will hand make in my notes. And I just make myself do that. I look at it almost like lifting heavy weights at the gym. This is what I do to keep my muscles strong. I make myself do this.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Anything else you do that you would like to share? I never heard that tip. That's a really good tip. Any other practical things that you make sure? Maybe I'll give you a moment to think about it. What I like to do, I keep track of all the things that I do well and right, and every day and every quarter, I make sure that I don't live the same quarter that I lived before. I think when I say that not having a judgment is somewhat equal opportunity and available to senior and junior folks alike, is that what, and I think we've had this conversation in the past, just because someone have had 60 repeated same years doesn't make them have a better judgment. It just means they live the same bad year 60 times. That's why I think it's such an equal opportunity. So I like to proactively make sure that every year I live is very different from the one I had before, and I keep track and analyze and create data charts and keep track of my performance. I find that data doesn't lie. It's my version of your ruler. I just like more data approach. But for you, what else do you find helpful in making sure that you actually actively develop that judgment and avoid the sort of intellectual laziness that you described as glossing over on things that you don't want to be doing?
And I realize that not everyone, has an opportunity like this. I fully realize that. But for me, the other piece of it is that I have somehow unintentionally become the person that people come to when they don't know what to do about a legal thing. A former Uber colleague came to me a couple of weeks ago and said, "Hey, listen, a friend of mine has issue XYZ ABC. Like, she would just really appreciate a conversation with someone." I'm very clear to say, like, "Hey, listen, I am not your attorney. This is general legal information that I would give to anyone." But I find having conversations.
Look at you at perfecting this. I'm not your lawyer. This is just for entertainment and education purposes only. I love that.
I'm not trying to put my bar license on the line for anyone, right? So I am very clear with people, but I think having opportunities like that is also a way in which I continue to sort of make sure that my lawyer gut biome is still in a good place. And I really encourage people to, I know, like, trying to find an hour, 2 hours to do something that's outside of your practice area can be really challenging. But there's so many like legal clinics, there's so many entrepreneurs that provide vehicles like that. I think there's a number of clinics. I think you were talking about one in Santa Clara. There's a number of clinics that can be available where, like, they take on all of the professional responsibility pieces of it and really give you a safe place in which to do that.
Yeah. Alexandra, we've come to the end. I'm going to have to end this conversation because it's been going on for a little while longer than I set out to do. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean,
inconceivable. How did we go over time? Inconceivable.
Inconceivable because, I guess neither you nor I like to talk or have nothing to share and just generally could be described as shrinking violets. And with that in mind, what is the sort of parting thoughts or advice you want to give to folks who listen to this conversation now or in the future? What is the one takeaway you want them to take from this conversation?
Stay curious. Stay curious. I know there's a lot of noise out there about AI. AI is coming for the legal profession, so on and so forth. Try to put that to the side as best as you can and stay curious, because the work is just going to continue to get interesting and no one's going to replace your gut.
I love that. I love it. Thank you so much. I really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Alexandra. It's always a treat to talk to you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Stay curious. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Notes to My Legal Self. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They are an act of courage. Remember, the future of law is bright. Enjoy your in-house practice. It's an adventure of a lifetime. See you soon.